She walked into his world with nothing to hide. She walked out carrying a secret that would change everything, and he never even saw her leave. If you've ever loved someone who made you feel like the whole world, only to discover you were never even part of theirs, this story is for you. Stay until the end. Like this video and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. The yellow shoes were the size of Olivia Carter's palm. She had found them 3 days ago in a boutique on West 57th Street, a tiny shop wedged between a florist and a dry cleaner. The kind of place you walk past 100 times without noticing until the morning your whole life shifted and suddenly every small thing in the world felt enormous. The shoes were soft leather, the color of afternoon sunlight, with a single white button on each strap. They cost $42. She had stood at the register for a full minute before deciding that yes, she was going to buy them because buying them made it real, and making it real meant she finally had to face what she had been circling around for 4 days. She was pregnant. 25 years old, 2 years into a life she had built from scratch in New York City, a junior graphic designer at a mid-sized firm in Midtown, whose name most people couldn't remember, living in a one-bedroom apartment in Astoria with a radiator that clanged every night at 2 in the morning like someone trying to escape through the pipes. And she was pregnant. The test had come back positive on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, she had taken 2 more. By Thursday, she had driven 40 minutes to a women's clinic in Brooklyn and sat in a paper gown on a padded examination table while a doctor with kind eyes confirmed what the tests had already told her. By Friday, she had bought the shoes. She hadn't told anyone. Not her mother back in Atlanta, not her best friend Priya, who would have had opinions immediately and loudly. Not even Damien, who was the reason for all of it, the only person she actually needed to tell. She had been carrying the shoes in her purse all week, not to show him, not yet, just to have them near her while she rehearsed conversations in the bathroom mirror at work, while she sat on the subway staring at strangers' hands, while she lay awake at 3 in the morning listening to the radiator and trying to organize her fear into something she could speak out loud without her voice breaking. She loved Damien Moretti. She understood on an intellectual level what that meant, what his family was, what his name meant in certain rooms, what the careful silences that surrounded him actually contained. She wasn't naive. She had grown up in Atlanta, the daughter of a woman who worked 2 jobs and had no patience for illusions. And she had arrived in New York at 23 with her eyes open and her trust calibrated carefully. She knew the Moretti name. You didn't spend 2 years in New York's tighter social circles, the kind you accidentally entered through a firm that occasionally did design work for high-end hospitality brands, without hearing it. She had met Damien at a private dinner hosted by a hotel group her firm had partnered with. He had been seated 2 chairs away and had spent the first hour of the meal not looking at her, and then had spent the rest of the evening looking at nothing else. He was 34, dark-haired, broad-shouldered, with a stillness about him that most people confused for arrogance. He had a way of listening that made you feel like the room had shrunk, and you were the only thing in it worth paying attention to. She hadn't meant to fall for him, but 6 months passed, and she had. He was careful with her in ways she hadn't expected. Not soft. He wasn't built for soft, but careful. Deliberate. He showed up when he said he would. He remembered the small things she mentioned without thinking. The name of the professor whose class had made her fall in love with typography. The fact that she couldn't eat cilantro without it tasting like soap. The way she always needed one window cracked open to sleep, no matter how cold it got. He had never said he loved her out loud, but he had never needed to, or so she had believed. Tonight she was going to tell him about the baby. She had rehearsed it 40 times. She was going to pour 2 glasses of water each, not wine, she wasn't drinking, and sit down across from him at that sleek marble island in his kitchen where they'd eaten takeout on a dozen Friday nights. And she was going to put the ultrasound photo on the counter, and she was going to say it straight because the only way through a hard conversation was through it. She had even decided she was going to put the shoes on the counter beside the photo because somehow the shoes made it real and tender in a way that words alone couldn't carry. She took the subway to his building on the Upper East Side. The elevator required a key card. She had one. He had given it to her 3 months ago without ceremony, just slid it across the kitchen island one evening and said her buzzing up from the lobby was irritating him. She had laughed. She had kept the card in the inner pocket of her wallet ever since. She pressed the button for the 43rd floor. The elevator doors opened to a private vestibule, marble-floored and softly lit. Damien's penthouse occupied the entire floor. She had been here dozens of times, but the scale of it never fully settled into ordinary. Two staff members kept the place running, a housekeeper named Clara, who was in her late 60s and moved like she owned the place, and a security man named Torres, who was always somewhere nearby, but was so quiet you rarely knew where. She stepped off the elevator. The vestibule was empty. The main door to the penthouse was closed, but not latched. She could see the line of light at the edge of the frame, the door resting against the strike plate without clicking shut. It happened sometimes when the heat was running and the floor expanded. She pushed it open without knocking. She heard the voices before she saw anything, coming from the dining room. Multiple voices, male, low, and layered. The particular frequency of men talking in a space where they believed themselves unobserved. She recognized Damien's voice immediately. That measured baritone, unhurried, with the faint trace of something that had never fully decided whether it was New York or not. She recognized one other voice as his father, Vincent, whom she had never met but had heard Damien on the phone with enough times to know the tenor of that relationship. Respectful on the surface, pressurized underneath. She thought, he has company. She thought, I should wait in the kitchen or come back. She thought, I'll just let him know I'm here so he isn't startled. She took 3 steps toward the dining room, and then she stopped, because she heard her own name. Olivia. Vincent's voice, not Damien's. Flat. The way you might say the name of a problem you had already categorized and filed. This has gone on long enough. A pause. The particular silence of a table full of people who are all deferring to the same person. Then Damien. I'm aware. Are you? Not a question, a challenge, measured and cold. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been spending an awful lot of time with a girl who has no idea what she's walked into. Someone else spoke. She didn't recognize the voice, but it was loose and slightly amused, the voice of someone who was comfortable enough in this room to treat it as entertainment. She's pretty, I'll give him that. She's beautiful. Damien's voice, unguarded, and that note of warmth in it, that exact note she knew, the one she had heard at 2 a.m. when he was tired and his defenses were down. That note cracked something open in the center of her chest. She's smart. She's funny. She doesn't perform. Most women I've been around, there's always a performance. With her, there isn't. She felt her hand press flat against the wall beside her without meaning to. Damien. Vincent again. I know. This family does not need... I said, I know. A silence. She could hear someone shifting in a chair. She could hear the low hiss of something being poured. Then the amused voice again. So what is she? Serious? You thinking of doing something stupid? A beat. She felt her breath suspend itself completely. No. Damien's voice, steady and clear. It was never serious. It's been a good 6 months. She's been good. But it's not serious. The next 3 seconds were the quietest 3 seconds of her life. Laughter rolled through the dining room, the easy, comfortable kind, the kind that belongs to people who have been right about something and are too gracious to say so directly. Does she know about you? A different voice, older, deliberate. An uncle, maybe. Someone used to asking the questions that needed asking. No. No hesitation, no flinching, just the word, clean and blunt. And she never will. More laughter, softer this time, the polished, private kind. Olivia did not move. She was aware with the strange precision that only arrives in moments of complete internal rupture of the exact physical texture of the moment, the coolness of the wall beneath her palm, the weight of her purse on her left shoulder where the baby shoes and the ultrasound photo sat in the inside pocket, the faint sound of traffic 43 floors below, the way her own heartbeat had gone very slow and very loud, the way her face felt absolutely neutral, the way her body had made the decision her mind hadn't finished making yet. She turned around. She walked back to the vestibule. She pressed the elevator button. The doors opened in 11 seconds. She counted. She stepped in. She pressed L. The doors closed. She did not cry. She did not shake. She did not let herself feel anything in the elevator because if she started feeling anything in the elevator, she would fall apart before she reached the street, and she was not going to fall apart in Damien Moretti's building, where people might see her, where someone might report back, where she might become a story that got told at another dinner table with that same comfortable laughter. The lobby was marble and brass, and a security desk with a man she'd seen a dozen times. She walked past him without making eye contact. She pushed through the glass doors. Cold October air hit her face. She kept walking. She walked 3 blocks before she stopped at a bodega and bought a bottle of water she didn't drink. She stood on the sidewalk holding it and looked at the street. The yellow cabs and the blur of people and the neon signs and the ordinary enormous loudness of New York on a Tuesday night. And she thought, with a clarity that surprised her, he will never know. Not about tonight, not about the baby, not ever. She made the decision right there on the sidewalk outside a bodega on East 73rd Street with $42 yellow shoes in her purse and the city moving around her like it didn't know anything had just ended. He would never know. She didn't go home right away. She walked south for 20 minutes and ended up on a bench in Carl Schurz Park, which was nearly empty at this hour, the East River black and restless beyond the railing. She sat there for a while and let herself breathe. Not cry. She had made a rule about that, at least for tonight. Just breathe. The ultrasound photo was tucked inside a small envelope in the inside pocket of her purse. She had carried it there for 3 days, that ghostly gray image with the small curved shape at the center, the single heartbeat that the ultrasound technician had pointed to with professional warmth and said was strong. She didn't take the photo out now. She didn't need to. She could feel it there the same way she could feel the shoes, the same way she had been feeling the fact of this baby for 4 days like a weight. That was also, in some quieter register, something she didn't have a word for yet. Not joy exactly. Not yet. Something more complicated. Something that would have been joy, she thought, if the evening had gone differently. She sat on that bench until the cold got serious, and then she stood up and walked to the nearest subway station and went home. She didn't sleep. She lay in her dark apartment and listened to the radiator and stared at the ceiling and thought through every practical thing she could think of. Her lease was up in 6 weeks. She had been thinking about renewing. She would not renew. She had $2,400 in savings and 3 weeks of PTO she hadn't used. She had a mother in Atlanta with a 3-bedroom house and a practical nature and no patience for other people's drama, but a deep and unshakable capacity for showing up when it mattered. She thought about calling Damien and saying nothing, just to hear his voice one more time and weigh it against what she now knew. She didn't. She thought about going back to the penthouse and walking into that dining room and putting the ultrasound photo on the table in front of his entire family. She didn't think about that one very long. By 4 in the morning, she had made 3 decisions. She was keeping the baby, she was going home to Atlanta, and she was going to disappear so completely that Damien Moretti would spend 6 months assuming she was angry before the full truth of what he'd lost occurred to him, and by then she would be unreachable. She moved fast. That was the thing about Olivia Carter. She had grown up with a mother who treated hesitation as a luxury, and she had inherited that particular muscle without realizing it until it was exactly what she needed. She made lists. She made phone calls. She did not allow herself to spiral. She emailed her landlord within 48 hours. Early termination penalty, she knew, but she had budgeted for it. She gave notice at work, a personal matter, a family situation. She appreciated the opportunity. Her manager was surprised and disappointed and professionally gracious. She packed her apartment in 11 days, which meant leaving behind a bookshelf and a lamp and a mirror. She couldn't fit in a rental van, and she decided that was fine, that those things had belonged to a version of her life that was already over. She changed her phone number on the morning she left New York. She didn't tell Priya where she was going, just said she needed time, that she would explain eventually, that she loved her. Priya sent back a string of concerned texts to her old number that Olivia would never receive. She drove south with her car packed, and her mother's address and the GPS and the radio on low. She stopped once for gas in Delaware and once for food in Maryland, sitting in a fast food parking lot eating a sandwich she barely tasted while the November sky went gray and wide above the highway. She pulled into her mother's driveway in Atlanta at 11:15 on a Thursday night. Margaret Carter was standing on the porch when Olivia got out of the car. She was 54 years old and had the posture of a woman who had decided decades ago that difficulty was not a valid reason to stop standing straight. She looked at her daughter's face and said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "Come inside. You look cold." That was it. No interrogation, no immediate flood of questions. Margaret had learned, through experience, that the full story would come when Olivia was ready to give it, and that the most useful thing in the meantime was to have food and warmth available. It took 3 days. On the third day, a Sunday afternoon, sitting at the kitchen table with coffee going cold between her hands, Olivia told her mother everything: the pregnancy, Damien, the penthouse, the dinner table, the laughter, the exact words. It was never serious, and she never will. Margaret listened without interrupting, which was not a thing that came easily to her. When Olivia finished, Margaret was quiet for almost a full minute. Then she said, "What do you need?" "To stay here for a while." "You can stay as long as you need." "I'm going to have the baby. I'm keeping it." "I know you are." No surprise in her voice, just steadiness. Olivia looked at her hands around the coffee cup. "He doesn't know, and I'm not telling him." Another silence. Margaret didn't argue. She didn't agree exactly. She said, "I hear you." Then she stood up and refilled the coffee and said she was going to make soup, and that was how that conversation ended. In the weeks that followed, the shape of a new life began assembling itself around Olivia. She found a freelance design client through an old contact, remote work, flexible hours, enough to start rebuilding her savings. She set up a home office in the guest room. She went to prenatal appointments at a clinic 20 minutes away and came home with updated ultrasound images and a growing awareness of the specific way that love and terror could occupy the same space inside a person without resolution. The baby was due in May. She told herself she did not think about Damien. She thought about him every day. Okay. In New York, Damien Moretti noticed she was gone on the third day. He was not, by nature or by training, a man who panicked. He had been raised in a world where panic was indistinguishable from weakness, and weakness was something you eliminated because leaving it in place was worse than the discomfort of removing it. He had learned to read situations quickly and coldly and to respond with economy. That framework had served him well for 34 years. It failed him completely with Olivia. He called her number on the third day and reached a disconnection message. He tried again. Same. He sent a text that delivered but showed no read receipt, then realized, an hour later, that the delivery confirmation might mean nothing. He had Torres reach out through channels to check the building in Astoria and was told her name was no longer on the lease, that the apartment had been vacated approximately a week ago. He stood in his kitchen and held his phone and did not move for a long time. He assumed at first that she was angry. He ran back through the last few weeks looking for the thing he had said or done. He knew he was difficult, knew his world imposed demands and absences and cancellations that he had never fully explained to her. He assumed she had hit a wall of frustration and pulled back. He gave it a week. He tried her number twice more. Disconnected. He had Ethan, his cousin, the only person in the family whose judgment he genuinely trusted, reach out through different channels to see if she had left the city. Ethan came back after 4 days with a confirmation. She had terminated her lease in Astoria, given notice at her firm in Midtown, and there was no current record of her in New York, no forwarding address filed anywhere accessible. She had simply ceased to be in New York. Damien was not accustomed to that sensation, the sensation of reaching for something that had been present for 6 months and finding only empty space. He recognized it as the kind of thing that happened when you had underestimated something for a long time and the underestimation finally came due. He did not share this with his family. They would have had opinions, and he did not want opinions. He did not share it with his father, who would have been satisfied in a way Damien could not afford to witness. He tried to work. He flew to Chicago for 2 days of meetings and sat through 3 hours of conversations about territory and supply chains and a business dispute that had been building for months. And he found that he was present in his body, but absent from his attention in a way that had never happened to him before. He came back to New York and stood in the kitchen of his penthouse on a Friday night, the same kitchen island where she had sat a dozen times, where the takeout containers had accumulated, where she had laughed at something he'd said about the food delivery man who always got the wrong order, and he felt the absence with a specificity he couldn't dismiss. Then Clara came to him. She had worked for the Moretti household for 19 years and had learned in that time to be present without being intrusive, to know things without saying them, to offer information only when the withholding of it would constitute a cruelty she couldn't justify to herself. She knocked on the doorframe of his office on a Wednesday evening. He looked up. "Mr. Moretti," she said. I need to tell you something about the night of the family dinner last month. He put his pen down. Miss Carter came that evening, Clara said. She had a key card. She came up while the dinner was still going. She paused. She was in the vestibule for a few minutes. She didn't knock. The silence in the office was absolute. She left before anyone saw her, Clara said. I heard the elevator. I looked at the camera log the next day. I don't know why exactly. I just had a feeling. She was here for about 4 minutes. Damien's voice, when it came, was very quiet. The dinner, while we were... Yes, sir. He didn't say anything else. Clara nodded once and withdrew. He sat in his office for a long time after that. The calculation was not complicated. He had been talking about her at that table, dismissing her in front of his father and his uncle and his cousin with a fluency that still made him cold to recall, describing her as temporary, expendable. A good 6 months. She had been standing 20 feet away. She had heard. She had turned around. She had walked out of his building and out of his city and changed her phone number and left no trail, and she had done it all without confrontation, without tears, without giving him a single moment to explain or justify or apologize, just removed herself completely and closed the door so cleanly he hadn't even heard it shut. He called Ethan. I need you to find her, he said. Wherever she is. I need to know she's safe. Ethan knew better than to ask for a reason. He said he'd have something in 48 hours. Then Ethan, being Ethan, thorough, meticulous, constitutionally incapable of giving his cousin half a picture, ran the search wider than Damien had asked. He pulled everything, her last known address, her employment history, her medical records through the systems he had access to that he wasn't supposed to have access to. He found the clinic appointment, Brooklyn, 4 weeks before she had left New York, an obstetrics clinic. He sat with that information for 12 hours before he brought it to Damien. When he did, he laid it on the table without editorializing, just the clinic name, the date, the type of appointment. Damien looked at it for a long time. How far along would she be? He asked. If it was confirmed at that appointment, she'd be around 5 months now. Another silence, the longest one yet. Where is she? Atlanta. Her mother's address. I have it. He flew to Atlanta the next morning. He didn't call ahead. He understood, with a clarity that had arrived fully formed and admitted no argument, that if she knew he was coming, she would not be there when he arrived. She was smart, and she was determined, and she had already demonstrated a capacity for disappearing that he should have taken more seriously the first time. He landed at Hartsfield-Jackson at 9:14 in the morning, rented a car, and drove to the address Ethan had given him. He sat outside the house for a while. It was a modest place in a quiet residential street, small yard, bare-limbed winter trees, a porch with a wooden bench. The kind of house that had been lived in carefully and for a long time. He noted the driveway, a silver Honda with Georgia plates he didn't recognize, and a dark blue sedan that Ethan had confirmed was registered to Olivia. She was here. He thought about knocking on the door. He decided against it. The element of her choice mattered, the opportunity for her to choose whether to face him or not, and showing up at her mother's door removed that choice. He went instead to a coffee shop 2 blocks away and spent the morning there, and in the early afternoon he drove to a grocery store that Ethan had noted she used. It was on her credit card statements, a Kroger about 1.5 miles from her mother's house, and parked and waited. He wasn't certain she would come. She came at 3:40 in the afternoon. He saw her across the parking lot before she saw him. She was wearing a heavy coat and had her hair pulled back, and she was moving with that particular focused efficiency he had always associated with her. Not hurried exactly, but purposeful, like she had a list in her head and was working through it. She had a basket on her arm. Then he saw the coat, the way it sat. He had not let himself fully assemble the reality of it until this moment, had held it at a remove, treated it as information rather than fact. Seeing it in the flat afternoon light of a grocery store parking lot in Atlanta was different. It arrived in his chest like something structural giving way. She was 5 months along. She turned to grab a cart from the rack and she saw him. Everything stopped. He watched her face go through 3 things in under a second: recognition, grief, and then something harder than either. She straightened. She held the cart handle. She looked at him across 30 feet of parking lot with an expression that contained absolutely nothing she was willing to give him. He walked toward her. She said, "Don't." One word, flat and quiet and completely final. He stopped. "Olivia." She looked past him, then back. Not at his face, at a point just beside it, the way you look when you are holding a difficult conversation with someone you cannot afford to look at directly. "You have nothing to say to me that I want to hear." "You're right," he said, "but I'm going to say it anyway." She made a small sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "Of course you are." She started moving toward the store entrance. He kept pace with her, not too close. "Clara told me." She stopped walking. "About the evening you came. The dinner." He made himself say it plainly. "You were there. You heard everything I said." She was still for a moment. Then she said, "And now you feel bad." Her voice was controlled in the precise way that voices are controlled when the alternative is falling apart. "Great, congratulations, that's wonderful for you. I'm not here to feel bad at you, I'm here because—" "Go home, Damien." "No." She turned to face him fully then, and what was in her face was not anger. Anger would have been easier. It was something flatter and more exhaustive than anger. The expression of someone who has been through a grief and has come out the other side into a place where the grief has become simply the shape of things, and they are not going back. "You said it yourself," she said. "It was never serious. I was good company for 6 months. That was your exact description, so go back to New York and have a good life and leave me alone." "Olivia, I have groceries to buy." She went inside. He stood in the parking lot in the cold and let her go. He found a bench near the entrance and sat on it. He waited 22 minutes until she came back out, cart full, and when she saw him still there, she stopped walking for a moment. He stood up. "I know about the clinic," he said. "Brooklyn, 4 weeks before you left." All the color left her face. He did not press it. He simply said, "I'm sorry for everything you heard that night. I'm sorry for every word of it. What I said it because my father was at that table and I was doing what I always do in that room, which is say what keeps the peace and protect myself and not think about the cost. That's not a reason. It's an explanation, and it's a bad one, and I know it." She was looking at him now, really looking, for the first time. "I'm not asking you for anything," he said. "I'm not here with demands. I just needed you to know that I know. And I needed to ask you—" He stopped, steady. "Are you pregnant?" The parking lot was very quiet. She looked at him for a long time. Then she loaded her groceries into the trunk of her car, got in, started the engine, and drove away. He stood there and watched until her taillights disappeared at the intersection. He had his answer, not in what she said, in what she didn't. He booked a flight back to New York for the following morning, but did not take it. He sat in his hotel room that night, a clean, unremarkable business hotel near the airport, and thought about what he was going to do. Not in the abstract, in practice. Practically, concretely, in the way he thought about every other problem his world produced, which was to identify the real shape of the thing and then respond to the real shape rather than the version of it that was easiest to address. The real shape of this was, she was pregnant with his child. She was 5 months along. She was in Atlanta with her mother, which meant she had support and stability and had made her peace with doing this alone. She had made a decision to exclude him, and she had made it for reasons that were his fault entirely, and she was not wrong to have made it. The question was not whether he deserved to be excluded. He very probably did. The question was what kind of man he was going to be about it. He had spent 34 years being a specific kind of man, the kind who ran a criminal organization that his father had built and handed down to him like a property deed, who made decisions about territory and violence and money with the practiced calm of someone who had grown up in rooms where those decisions were made before dinner. He was not stupid about what that made him. He did not dress it up. But sitting in this hotel room in Atlanta, he thought about the yellow shoes. He hadn't known about them. He hadn't known she had come to the penthouse that night carrying them, carrying the proof of a future she had gathered the courage to offer him. And he had shattered that courage with 15 words at a dinner table without even knowing she was there to hear it. He thought about that. He thought about it for a long time, then he picked up his phone and called Ethan. "I need you to find me somewhere to stay in Atlanta," he said. "Short term. Somewhere quiet." A pause. How short term? I don't know yet. Another pause. Damien, what are you doing? He thought about it. I don't know yet, he said again, but I'm not leaving. He hung up and lay back on the hotel bed and stared at the ceiling and listened to the distant sound of traffic, and felt for the first time in years completely uncertain, not about what the right thing was, but about whether he was capable of doing it. Whether the parts of him that were capable of it still existed, or whether 34 years of being what he was had removed them so thoroughly they were simply gone. He didn't know, but in the morning, instead of the airport, he drove back toward the quiet residential street with the winter trees and the wooden porch and the dark blue sedan in the driveway. He parked 2 blocks away. He sat with the engine running. He was still sitting there when his phone rang. Ethan's voice was careful when he said, Damien, there's something you need to know. Your father made a call this morning to Richard. Damien went very still. Richard Moretti, his father's brother. The family's fixer. The word they never said out loud, but everyone understood. The man who made problems go away. He knows where she is, Ethan said. I don't know what he told him exactly, but Richard booked a flight to Atlanta this morning. The engine idled. When does he land? Damien asked. 3 hours ago, Ethan said quietly. He's already there. Damien was out of the car before the engine finished dying. He didn't run. Running attracted attention. And attention in a quiet residential Atlanta neighborhood at 11 in the morning was exactly the kind of thing his family had spent decades teaching him to avoid. But he walked fast, phone already at his ear, calling Ethan back before he'd reached the corner. Where's Richard now? I don't have eyes on him. I just have the flight record and a car rental out of Hartsfield. Black Escalade. I can get the plate in. Get it now. He turned onto her mother's street and slowed. The block was ordinary and still. A dog walker at the far end, a kid's bicycle tipped over on a lawn, the kind of suburban quiet that made everything feel slower than it was. He scanned both sides of the street. The black Escalade was parked directly in front of Margaret Carter's house. He stopped walking. The vehicle was empty, which meant Richard was already inside. Damien put his phone in his pocket and crossed the street. He didn't knock. He tried the door handle and found it unlocked and pushed it open and walked in. And the first thing he saw was his uncle standing in the middle of a modest living room with his jacket buttoned and his posture correct and a manila envelope in one hand, the kind of envelope that meant a number had already been decided and written down, and Olivia sitting across from him on a floral couch with her arms crossed and her chin up, and an expression on her face that he recognized immediately as the expression she wore when she had made a decision and was waiting for the rest of the world to accept it. Her mother was standing in the doorway to the kitchen, and Margaret Carter was not the kind of woman who stood in doorways without a reason. She was watching Richard the way you watch something you hadn't decided whether to throw out yet. Richard turned when Damien came in. He was 61 years old, Vincent Moretti's younger brother by 4 years, and he had the particular quality of a man who had spent his entire life being useful to someone more powerful than himself, and had convinced himself this was the same as having power. He was silver-haired and impeccably dressed, and his face, when he saw Damien, went through a quick private calculation before settling on something neutral. "Damien," he said, "I wasn't aware you were in Atlanta." Clearly, Damien looked at the envelope. "What's in it?" A pause. "That's a private conversation between What's in the envelope, Richard?" Richard's jaw tightened slightly. He set the envelope on the coffee table between himself and Olivia with the deliberate care of a man who wanted to make the gesture look like a reasonable offer rather than what it actually was. "Your father is prepared to be generous," he said. "Miss Carter could live very comfortably. The child would have everything it needs. All we're asking, get out." The room went quiet. Richard looked at him steadily. "Your father sent me here." "I know who sent you." Damien stepped further into the room, and something in how he moved made Richard go very still, because Richard had known Damien his entire life and knew the difference between the man performing control and the man who had stopped performing entirely. "I'm telling you to get out of this house, right now. And I'm telling you to call my father tonight and tell him that if anyone from this family comes near her again for any reason, they will answer to me personally. Not through lawyers, not through letters. To me." Silence. Margaret Carter had not moved from the kitchen doorway. She was watching Damien now with a new quality of attention. Not approval exactly, but the careful look of a woman recalibrating. Richard picked up the envelope from the coffee table slowly. "You're making a mistake," he said. "Then it's mine to make." Richard looked once at Olivia, a flat, assessing look that contained no apology and no warmth. And then he walked past Damien and out the front door without another word. A minute later, the Escalade started and pulled away. The room breathed. Damien turned to Olivia. She was looking at the coffee table where the envelope had been, and her arms were still crossed, and the set of her jaw told him that what had just happened was not going to translate automatically into anything resembling gratitude. "You had no right to come into my mother's house," she said. "I know." "You had no right to—" "I know." He didn't argue it. "Are you all right?" She made a short, almost inaudible sound. "I was handling it." "I saw. Then why did you—" She stopped herself, pressed her lips together, looked at the window. Margaret Carter spoke from the kitchen doorway, and her voice was level and entirely unapologetic. "You want coffee?" she said. And it took Damien a second to realize she was talking to him. He looked at her. "If that's all right." Margaret said, "Sit down," and went back into the kitchen. Olivia looked at her mother's retreating back with an expression that suggested she and Margaret would be having a different conversation later. Then she looked at Damien, still standing in the middle of the room, and something in her face moved. Not softened, but shifted, the way a locked thing moves when you apply pressure in exactly the right place without forcing it. "Sit down," she said. Her voice was tired. "You're making the room feel small." He sat. She didn't say anything for a moment. From the kitchen came the sound of Margaret filling the kettle with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to give difficult conversations a soundtrack. "How did you know he was coming?" Olivia asked. "Ethan, he monitors my father's communications." "Your cousin spies on your father." "My cousin keeps me alive," Damien said. "It's a different thing." She looked at him then, really looked, in that direct way she had that he'd always found disarming because most people in his world had learned not to look directly at things. "What did your father say to you when he found out?" "He didn't tell me. He went around me." "Why?" "Because he knew I'd tell him no." Olivia was quiet for a moment. Outside, a car passed slowly. The kettle in the kitchen began its low build toward a boil. "What was in the envelope?" she asked. "Money. A legal agreement. Something that would keep you comfortable and keep the Moretti name out of anything related to the child." He said it flatly, because she deserved flatness, not euphemism, not managed language. "My father thinks in terms of problems and solutions. You and the baby are a complication he wanted resolved quietly." She looked at the table. "And you?" she said. "What do you think in terms of—" He was quiet for a moment. "I'm working on that." Margaret came in with 2 mugs and set them on the table without ceremony and went back to the kitchen, and Damien understood that Margaret Carter's version of graciousness was to give them the room while staying close enough that she could hear everything, and he respected it. Olivia wrapped both hands around the mug. Her knuckles were tight. She was looking somewhere past him. "I need you to understand something," she said. "What you walked in on today, what your father tried to do, that's the world you come from. That's not a surprise to me. I knew what your family was. I was never naive about it." She paused. "What I was naive about was you." He took that without flinching. "I thought—" She stopped, started again. 6 months. That's a real amount of time. I wasn't imagining what was between us. I know I wasn't. So when I heard you say what you said at that table, it wasn't just that you hurt me. It was that I couldn't trust my own judgment anymore. About you, about myself, about what I thought I knew. "You weren't wrong," he said, "about what was between us." "Then why did you say it?" "Because my father was in the room." The words came out rough and honest and not very flattering. "Because I have spent my entire life saying what that room needs to hear. It's not a habit. It's a survival mechanism that I've never once questioned because I never had to. Until now." She was looking at him. "I said it," he continued. "And I believed it while I was saying it because in that room I become someone who believes whatever keeps the structure intact. And then I sat in my kitchen 3 days later and realized you were gone and couldn't figure out why it felt like something had been removed from my chest." He stopped. "That's not an excuse. I'm not offering it as one. I'm just telling you what was true. A long silence. "I'm having this baby," Olivia said. "Alone. That's the plan. That was the plan before you showed up in that parking lot, and it's still the plan." "I know. I don't want your money. I don't want your family's money. I don't want to be a problem your father has to manage." "I know. So what do you want, Damien?" Her voice cracked slightly on his name, the first fracture in all that controlled steadiness, and she pressed her lips together and steadied herself. "Because you're here, and you could have left. So what do you actually want?" He thought about the yellow shoes he had found out about through Ethan, because Ethan had been thorough. The $42 shoes and the soft leather the color of sunlight, the ones she had been carrying in her purse when she came to the penthouse that night. He didn't say that. He said, "I want to know if there's a version of this where you let me show up, not as a Moretti, not with money or lawyers or anything my father would recognize as meaningful, just showing up, being present, being someone you can call when things get hard." She stared at him. "You burned that," she said. "You burned it in front of your whole family, and you laughed." "Yes. And now you want me to hand you another one?" "I want you to decide that, not me." He met her eyes. "I'm not asking you to forgive anything. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to tell me if there's a door, even a small one, and I'll stand outside it for however long it takes." The room was very quiet. Olivia looked at the steam rising from her coffee mug. She pressed one thumb against the ceramic handle, slow and deliberate. She breathed once, long and careful. Then she said, "You should go back to New York." "Olivia, I'm not saying never." Her voice was very controlled. "I'm saying not yet. I'm saying I need you to not be in this city right now while I'm trying to figure out how to make a life that works. I can't think with you here. I can't." She stopped. "I need time." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood. "All right." He picked up his jacket, walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame and turned back once. "The envelope Richard brought," he said. "He took it with him. But my father will try again. A lawyer next time, probably, or through channels that look more official." He held her eyes. "Don't sign anything. Call me first. I don't care what time it is." She didn't respond. He nodded once and went out. He sat in the rental car 2 blocks away for 20 minutes before he started the engine. Then he drove to the airport and sat in the departure lounge and stared at the gate board and thought about what she had said, "Not yet," and what it cost her to say even that much, and whether he was the kind of man who could stand outside a door without forcing it. He thought he might not be. He thought he was going to have to become one. He booked the flight back to New York and stared out the airplane window at Atlanta spreading below him and felt the distance accumulating between himself and that quiet street, and told himself that distance was what she needed and that he was going to give it to her even if it was the hardest thing he'd done in a life that had contained genuinely hard things. He was back in New York by 9 that night. By 10, his phone rang. His father. He let it ring. Vincent Moretti did not accept being ignored. He showed up at the penthouse the following morning unannounced, which was his prerogative as the man who had built everything Damien stood on, and he exercised it with the easy authority of someone who had never seriously considered that his access might one day be contested. Damien was in the kitchen when Torres announced him. He told Torres to let him up. Vincent Moretti at 68 was a broad, deliberate man with gray at his temples and the particular bearing of someone who had learned very early that rooms rearranged themselves around him and had spent his entire life allowing them to do so. He came in, took off his coat, handed it to Torres without looking at him, and walked into the kitchen and sat at the island like it was his own house. Damien put a cup of coffee in front of him and leaned against the counter opposite. "Richard tells me you threw him out," Vincent said. "I did." "In front of the woman?" "Yes." Vincent turned the coffee cup once on the marble, a small, deliberate motion. "I want to understand what you think you're doing." "I'm handling it." "You're not handling it. You're making it worse." Vincent's voice was patient in the way that things are patient when they are also immovable. "There is a simple situation here, Damien. A woman who knows things she shouldn't. A child who will carry your name whether we want it to or not. These are complications that can be managed cleanly or messily, and I sent Richard to manage them cleanly, and you— She's not a complication." Silence. Vincent looked at him. "She is the mother of my child," Damien said. "And the child is mine. And I'm telling you, as clearly as I can, that any action this family takes toward either of them without going through me first will be treated as a direct move against me. The kitchen was very quiet. You don't mean that, Vincent said. I've never meant anything more. Something shifted in his father's face. Not anger exactly, something older and colder. The look of a man reappraising a structure he thought he understood. You would challenge me. Over a woman you've known 6 months. Over my child, Damien said, and the woman who is carrying it. Yes. Vincent was quiet for a long moment. He looked at his coffee. He did not drink it. She'll use it against you, he said finally. Whatever you're feeling right now, she will find the shape of it, and she will use it. That is what women in her position do. You don't know her. I know the type. There is no type. Damien's voice stayed level, but something behind his eyes went hard and bright. She left New York without saying a word. She changed her number. She disappeared and didn't ask me for anything. That is not someone who is positioning herself to use something. That is someone who wanted nothing more to do with me. His father absorbed this. Then let her go, Vincent said. If she wants nothing, give her nothing. Walk away clean. I can't do that. Why not? Because there are yellow shoes in a purse in Atlanta that she was going to show me, Damien thought. Because she came to that penthouse that night carrying a future, and I destroyed it before she could even set it down. He didn't say any of that. He said, because it's the wrong thing to do. Vincent stared at him. Then he picked up his coat from the stool where Torres had draped it, which meant Torres had somehow anticipated this, and he stood and said, quietly and without theater, You are making a decision that will cost you more than you currently understand. Probably, Damien said. Vincent left. The weeks that followed were the strangest of Damien's life. He went back to work. Meetings, decisions, the constant low-level management of a criminal organization that described itself in polite company as a real estate and hospitality group. He did these things competently because competence was a reflex by now. But something in the architecture of his days had shifted in a way he couldn't fully describe and didn't try to. He called Olivia twice in the first 2 weeks. Both times she let it go to voicemail. He left short messages. Nothing pressuring, nothing that required a response. Just, I'm here. Just, I hope you're doing okay. The messages of a man standing outside a door. On the 3rd week, she called him back. It was 9:30 on a Tuesday night, and he was in his office, and her name on his phone screen produced a physical response he would have been embarrassed to admit to. Hi, she said. Hi. A pause. I had a prenatal appointment today. He waited. Everything is fine, she said. The baby is fine. Growing the way she's supposed to. He absorbed that. She? He said, keeping his voice very careful. A pause that contained something complicated. I found out the sex. I wasn't going to tell you, but then She stopped. She's healthy, that's all. I just thought you should know she's healthy. He sat very still. Thank you, he said, for telling me. Another pause, shorter. I have another appointment in 4 weeks, she said. In Atlanta. It's just a standard checkup. She stopped again, and what followed was silence that had a particular texture, the silence of someone standing at the edge of something they haven't decided about yet. I'm not inviting you, she said carefully. I'm just telling you. He understood exactly what she was telling him. I'll be in Atlanta, he said. A breath. Okay. She hung up. He sat in his office for a long time after that, with his phone face down on the desk, and the city humming 43 floors below, and something in his chest that had been locked closed for 34 years, making a sound he didn't entirely recognize. 4 weeks. He could give her 4 weeks. He was 3 days into those 4 weeks when Ethan came to him with a look on his face that Damien had learned to read over 30 years of knowing him. The look that meant the thing he was about to say was not the kind of thing he wanted to say. Your father had a meeting yesterday, Ethan said, with the Caruso family. Damien went still. Specifically with Marco Caruso, Ethan continued. And the topic, from what I can piece together, was a marriage arrangement. The word landed in the room like something thrown. There's a daughter, Ethan said. 28, Elena Caruso. The alliance would consolidate the Caruso territory on the eastern seaboard with our distribution network. Clean, profitable, political. He paused. And it would make the situation in Atlanta irrelevant, publicly, strategically. Your father would present it as moving forward. Damien said nothing. He's moving fast, Ethan said. The Carusos want an answer in 2 weeks. If your father commits to it, it becomes a family obligation. Not just his, yours. He looked at his cousin steadily. It would mean the end of whatever you're trying to build in Atlanta, Damien. Completely. The office was silent. Damien stood up slowly and went to the window and looked out at the city. The skyline he had grown up inside. The geography of power he had always navigated without questioning its coordinates, and felt the walls of it closing in a way they never had before. 2 weeks. His father was giving him 2 weeks before making a decision that would make every choice Damien was trying to make impossible. He turned from the window. Get me on a flight to Atlanta, he said. Tonight. Ethan didn't move immediately. Damien, if you go back there now before she's ready, I know. You could lose whatever ground you've... I know. His voice was quiet and final. Book the flight. Ethan looked at him for a moment longer. Then he took out his phone. The flight landed at Hartsfield-Jackson at 11:47 at night. Damien had not called ahead. He understood, sitting in the back of the car Ethan had arranged, that showing up in Atlanta at midnight without warning was the wrong move, that it would read as exactly the kind of pressure he had promised himself he would not apply. He understood this clearly and chose to do it anyway, because the alternative was sitting in New York for 2 weeks, while his father built a wall around him brick by brick, and by the time Olivia was ready to open any door at all, there would be no door left to open. The driver took him to the hotel he'd stayed in before. He checked in. He sat on the edge of the bed in his coat and called Olivia. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. He waited 10 minutes and called again. Voicemail. He sent a text. I'm in Atlanta. I need to talk to you. Something's happened with my father. I'm not asking to come over tonight, but I need you to call me back. He stared at the phone for 20 minutes. Nothing. He took off his coat and his jacket and his shoes and lay back on the hotel bed with his phone on his chest and stared at the ceiling and listened to the particular silence of a city that wasn't his and thought about his father sitting across a table from Marco Caruso with the practiced ease of a man conducting a transaction that was also, incidentally, the destruction of his son's life. He thought about Elena Caruso. He had met her twice at family functions, a composed, intelligent woman who had nothing to do with any of this and deserved better than being deployed as a strategic instrument. He thought about what it would mean to his father to complete that alliance. The territory, the money, the clean public narrative of a Moretti heir settled and aligned with the right family. And Olivia in Atlanta, unreachable, carrying a daughter nobody at that table would acknowledge. He fell asleep with the light on. His phone woke him at 6:12 in the morning. He grabbed it before the second ring. Not Olivia. Ethan. Talk to me, Damien said. I need you to listen without reacting, Ethan said. The particular quality of his cousin's voice, steady, measured, prepared, told Damien immediately that what came next was going to require the instruction. Say it. My father had dinner with your father last night. After you left? A pause. Uncle Vincent knows you're in Atlanta. He assumed you'd go back the moment I told you about the Caruso meeting. He anticipated it. Another pause, shorter. Damien, he's been anticipating it. The Caruso meeting wasn't the plan. The Caruso meeting was the bait. The room went very still. The real play, Ethan said carefully, is a legal one. Vincent's been talking to the family's attorneys for the past 3 weeks about paternity rights, about what it looks like legally if you establish a pattern of behavior. Flying to Atlanta, showing up uninvited, pressuring an unmarried woman who is on record as having left New York to get away from you. He stopped. He's been building a file, Damien, documenting your visits, Richard's visit, everything. If he takes it to a family court in Georgia, he can't take anything to family court. I haven't done anything. You showed up at her mother's house unannounced and told Richard to leave. Richard's account of that meeting describes you as aggressive and threatening. That's his account on record. Ethan's voice stayed level. I'm not saying it holds up. I'm saying it doesn't need to hold up in court. It needs to hold up long enough to make Olivia's situation legally complicated, long enough to make her feel like any connection to you puts her and the baby at risk. He paused. Your father wants her to make the legal problem go away herself. He wants her scared enough to sign something. And if you keep showing up, you're giving him the material to scare her with. Damien sat up slowly. He pressed the heel of his hand against his sternum and breathed once. There's more, Ethan said. Say it. The attorney your father is working with, he made contact with a woman named Priya Nair 2 days ago. Olivia's friend. Former friend, I guess, since Olivia cut contact when she left New York. The attorney approached her under the cover of a different matter entirely, asked some questions about Olivia's state of mind in the weeks before she left the city, her stability, whether she'd seemed erratic, whether there'd been any concerning behavior. A pause that felt very deliberate. Priya didn't know what she was being used for. She answered the questions honestly because she thought it was something else. But those answers are now in a file your father's attorney is building. Damien stood up. He walked to the window. Atlanta in early morning. Gray sky, the thin light of January pressing against the glass. He's going to try to establish that she's an unstable mother, Damien said. It came out flat, not a question. He's building the option to, Ethan said. Whether he uses it depends on whether he needs to. Right now it's leverage. It's a threat he doesn't have to make out loud. If Olivia ever tries to formalize anything, custody, child support, the Moretti name on a birth certificate, your father has a file ready to make her legal situation very difficult and very public. The window glass was cold. Damien pressed 2 fingers against it without meaning to, feeling the January seeping through. He's been doing this for 3 weeks, he said. Yes. While I was standing outside her door giving her time. Yes. He was quiet for a long moment. You knew? He said. Quietly. The word had an edge under it that he didn't try to hide, a silence on Ethan's end that answered before the words did. I found out 4 days ago. I've been trying to verify it fully before I brought it to you. I didn't want to give you something half-built. A pause. I'm sorry. I should have told you the moment I suspected. Damien said nothing. Damien, I need an hour, he said, and hung up. He stood at the window for a long time. The thing about his father's move, the thing that made it genuinely cold rather than merely ruthless, was how well it understood him. Vincent Moretti had looked at his son and correctly identified the one strategy Damien couldn't defend against directly. A frontal confrontation Damien could meet. Money he could refuse to let her accept. Even a legal battle, if it came to that, he could fund and fight. But he couldn't fight a file that didn't officially exist yet. He couldn't defend Olivia against a threat that hadn't been made. And the more he showed up in Atlanta, the more material his father had to work with. He had been given space as a tactic. His father had used that space as a construction site. He picked up his phone and called Olivia. This time she answered on the second ring. It's early, she said. Not angry, cautious. I know. I'm sorry. He heard her breath shift slightly, the adjustment of someone sitting up in bed coming to attention. I need to see you today. I need to tell you something in person. A pause. What happened? Not on the phone. Damien. Her voice had gone careful in the way that meant she was already afraid and was deciding whether to admit it. Tell me right now what level of panic I should be at. You shouldn't panic at all, but you need to hear this. A longer pause. He could hear her breathing, slow and deliberate, and he knew she was doing the thing she always did when she was deciding something, pressing her thumb against her palm, a small private gesture he'd noticed 100 times without ever commenting on. Coffee shop on Peachtree, she said. There's a place called Lena's. 1 hour. She hung up. Lena's was a small place with wood tables and mismatched chairs, and the smell of dark roast so deep in the walls it had become structural. It was a quarter full at 7 in the morning, a few people with laptops, a man reading a physical newspaper, a young mother with a toddler who kept trying to climb off her chair. Damien was there first. He took a corner table with sightlines to the door and ordered black coffee and sat with both hands around the cup and watched the entrance. Olivia came in 9 minutes later. She was 7 months along now. The coat she was wearing was a heavy gray wool that she had unbuttoned at the front because there was no longer a practical way to button it. Her hair was down. She looked like she hadn't slept particularly well, which made two of them. She spotted him immediately and came directly to the table without pausing at the counter, which meant she was too tense to want coffee, which meant she was more afraid than she'd sounded on the phone. She sat down. She looked at his face. "Tell me," she said. He told her. All of it. The Caruso meeting. Ethan's call. The attorney. Priya. The file. He laid it out in sequence without softening any of it, because she needed the full picture and she needed it straight, and the one thing he refused to do in this moment was manage her reaction by managing the information. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for almost a full minute. She was looking at the table surface, the wood grain, the ring his coffee cup had left. Her hands were flat on the table in front of her, and he could see the tension in them, the way her fingers had gone very still in the deliberate way of someone preventing themselves from movement. "Priya," she said finally. She didn't know what she was giving them. The attorney misrepresented, "I know she didn't know." Olivia's voice was controlled and very quiet. I'm not angry at Priya." She stopped. "I left her behind too. I just disappeared on her. She probably answered those questions because she was worried about me and nobody had told her anything." She pressed her lips together. "That's on me. It's on my father." "Yes." She looked up at him. Her eyes were steady, but there was something moving behind them. Not tears, something older and harder than tears. "He's telling me that if I try to make any of this legal, if I put your name anywhere near my daughter's life officially, he will make it a fight I can't win. He's building the threat. He hasn't made it yet." "He doesn't have to make it." She said it quietly and with perfect clarity, like someone reading a translation of something she already understood. "That's the whole point. He just has to make sure I know it exists." She sat back slightly. "He's very good at this." "Yes," Damien said, "he is." She looked at him for a long moment. "And where are you in all of this?" she said. "Because you're his son. This is your family's machine into Shamasais, and you're sitting here telling me how it works. Which I appreciate, I genuinely do. But I need to understand, what does Damien Moretti actually do about his father? Not what does he intend, not what does he want. What does he actually do?" The coffee shop noise filled the space between them. The toddler at the other table said something emphatic in toddler language, and the mother laughed softly. "I'm going to go see my father today," Damien said, "and I'm going to tell him to shut it down. And if he doesn't," he met her eyes, "then I make it public." She blinked. "What?" "Every operation my father runs exists in the shadow between legitimate business and what it actually is. That shadow requires the cooperation of a lot of people who need to believe the legitimate part is real." He said it without drama, just fact. "If I make the existence of this file public, if I make it known that Vincent Moretti is using family attorneys to build a case against the unmarried pregnant woman his son was involved with, it doesn't matter that it never goes to court. The story is the weapon. I give that story to the right people. It lives in the room for years. Every business conversation he tries to have, every alliance he tries to build, it's in the room." Olivia was staring at him. "You'd burn your own family," she said. "I'd burn a specific operation my father built to threaten the mother of my daughter." He said, "Those are different things." She was quiet for a long moment. "He'll never forgive you." "Probably not. Your position in the family is already different than it was." His voice stayed level. "I'm not naive about what this costs. I've been thinking about it since 6 this morning, but I need you to understand that I am not operating inside my father's plan anymore. I'm done letting him move pieces and then reacting." He leaned forward slightly. "I need you to trust me enough to give me 48 hours. Let me go to New York, have this conversation with my father face to face, and deal with it directly. If it works, the file goes away and my father understands that you are off limits permanently. If it doesn't work, you burn it down." "Yes." She looked at him for a long time. She had, he thought, the most honest face he had ever seen on a person. Not in the sense of being easy to read, but in the sense that what was on it was always what was actually there. No performance. She had told him that herself, months ago, that she was too tired to perform. And right now, what was on her face was a complex and unresolved calculation that had a lot of factors in it and was working through all of them in real time. 48 hours, she said finally. He nodded. And then you call me. Whatever happened, you call me first. Yes. She pushed her chair back and stood. She was reaching for her coat when she stopped and looked at him with an expression that was different from anything else she'd shown him this morning. Quieter and more complicated and almost against her will. She kicks at night, she said. The baby. Around 10 o'clock every night, like she's announcing something. She paused. I thought you should know that. He looked up at her. She nodded once and walked out. He sat there for a while after she left and let the information settle into him. The weight and warmth of it, the specific beauty of it, the 10 o'clock kicks. And then he put money on the table and went back to the hotel and booked the first flight to New York. He landed at JFK at 2 in the afternoon. He did not go to the penthouse. He went directly to his father's office in a building on Park Avenue that presented itself to the world as the headquarters of a real estate development group and was, in practice, the nerve center of the Moretti organization's legitimate infrastructure. He told the assistant he didn't have an appointment. She started to say his father was in a meeting. He walked past her. Vincent's office was a large corner room on the 32nd floor with windows on two sides and the kind of furniture that communicated permanence rather than comfort. Vincent was indeed in a meeting. Two men Damien didn't recognize, suits and cautious postures, the particular energy of people who knew they were in a room where real things got decided. Vincent looked up when Damien walked in. I need the room, Damien said, not to his father, to the two men. They looked at Vincent. Vincent said nothing for a moment. Then he said, Give us 10 minutes. They gathered their things and left without making eye contact with Damien. The door closed. Vincent leaned back in his chair and looked at his son with an expression of composed, unhurried assessment, like a man inspecting a structure he had built, and was deciding whether a crack in it was superficial or foundational. You've been to Atlanta again, he said. You know I have. And now you're here. At 2 in the afternoon without calling. He tilted his head slightly. You look tired. Close the file, Damien said. Silence. The attorney's file. The material from Priya Nair. Whatever your legal team has been building for the past 3 weeks on Olivia, close it, destroy it, and call off anyone in this organization who is anywhere near her or her mother. He kept his voice even. I'm not asking. Vincent looked at him steadily. And if I don't, Vincent said, then I have a conversation with Marco Caruso, directly. I call him personally, and I tell him that while his family has been negotiating an alliance with ours, my father has been building a legal file against the mother of my unborn child as leverage to keep her compliant. Saki apai po. He paused. The Caruso family has daughters, father, 2 of them. Marco Caruso does not do business with men who build legal cases against pregnant women. That alliance is worth $40 million over the next 5 years. I will end it with one phone call. Vincent was very still. Furthermore, Damien said, I have enough documentation of the family's actual operations, not the real estate front, the actual operations, to make the next 18 months very uncomfortable for people who need to believe we are what we say we are. I'm not threatening to go to law enforcement. I'm threatening to make our business partners nervous. And nervous business partners make bad decisions that cost money. He let that land. Shut it down. Today. The office was completely silent. Vincent Moretti looked at his son across the desk for a long moment. Long enough that the light from the windows shifted slightly, the winter afternoon moving through its short arc. You would do that, he said. Not a question. Something that sounded almost like wonder, the reluctant kind. I would do that, Damien said. Another silence. She has you, Vincent said quietly, not cruelly, with the flat precision of an observation. That woman has you completely. My daughter has me, Damien said. Olivia is her mother, so yes, I'm choosing them, both of them, every time. Vincent looked at the desk surface. Something moved in his face, something old and very deeply buried, the kind of thing that doesn't surface often in men like him. Whatever it was gone quickly. The Caruso alliance, he said. I'll withdraw my objection to it, Damien said. If the file disappears and she is left alone permanently. A long pause. Elena Caruso is a good woman, Vincent said. I know she is. Find her a good man. He held his father's eyes. Shut it down, father. Today. Vincent said nothing for 30 seconds. 40. The city spread below the windows in every direction, enormous and indifferent. Then he picked up the phone on his desk and dialed an internal number and said 3 words to whoever answered, cancel the file. He set the phone down. He looked at his son and said, you understand what you're building in Atlanta will bring problems I won't protect you from. I know. If the organization ever sees it as a vulnerability, I know. Damien didn't move. I'll handle what comes. That's always been the arrangement. Vincent nodded once. Damien turned and walked to the door. He had his hand on the frame. The same position, the same gesture as the morning in Margaret's living room. And he heard his father say quietly from behind him, she must be something. He stopped. He didn't turn around. She is, he said, and walked out. He was in the elevator, descending 32 floors toward Park Avenue, when his phone buzzed. Not Ethan. Not Olivia. A number he didn't recognize. Georgia area code. He answered. A woman's voice, professional and very calm. Mr. Moretti, this is Dr. Anita Webb calling from Grady Memorial Hospital in Atlanta. I'm trying to reach the emergency contact for Olivia Carter. She listed your name and number as... His stomach dropped through the elevator floor. What happened? He said. Miss Carter was brought in approximately 40 minutes ago. She's stable, but she went into early labor, and there are some complications. We need to... The doctor's voice continued, precise and measured, but Damien had already stopped processing the specific words because the only word that mattered had already reached him, complications. And underneath it, the word the doctor hadn't said yet, the word that lived inside complications when you were 7 months pregnant and you were alone and 40 minutes had already passed before anyone thought to. He was already moving before the doctor finished the sentence. Elevator doors opened at the lobby, and he was through them before they had fully parted, coat in one hand, phone at his ear, crossing the marble floor of the Park Avenue building at a pace that made the security desk guard stand up slightly before recognizing him and sitting back down. He hit the street and the January air came at him like a wall, and he was already calling Ethan with his other hand, 2 phones, 2 calls, both ringing. Dr. Webb was still talking. The placenta has partially separated, which is causing the early labor, and we're monitoring both her and the baby closely, but at 32 weeks there are protocols we need to... Is she conscious? Yes, she's in pain, but she's conscious and stable. We're managing... I need to be there. Mr. Moretti, that's entirely... How long does she have before you have to make a decision about delivery? A brief pause. The pause of a professional recalibrating to a different kind of conversation. We're trying to slow the labor. If we can stabilize in the next few hours, we may be able to hold off. But if the separation worsens, I'll be there in 2.5 hours, he said. Do not make any decisions that can wait until I'm there. The medical decisions are made in consultation with the patient. I know that. I'm asking you not to let her face them alone. His voice cracked slightly on the last word, and he didn't try to hide it. Please. Another pause, shorter. We'll keep her informed and supported, the doctor said. Come quickly. He hung up. Ethan picked up on the first ring. I need a car to JFK right now, and the first available flight to Atlanta. Charter if commercial is more than 40 minutes out. Move. What happened? Olivia, hospital, early labor complications. Move, Ethan. He heard Ethan already typing. Car's 4 minutes. There's a Delta flight at 4:50. You can make it if... Get me on it. Done. Damien? A pause. She's going to be all right. He didn't answer that. He stood on the sidewalk in the January cold and watched the traffic on Park Avenue and thought about a woman in a hospital bed in Atlanta who had listed his name as her emergency contact at some point, when he didn't know. He hadn't known that. That information arrived in him now with a physical weight, and who was alone with something frightening and medical and 32 weeks along. And the 2.5 hours between him and that room felt like geography he could not accept. The car arrived in 3 minutes. He got through security at JFK with 8 minutes to spare and boarded still in his coat, not stopping at the gate lounge, walking straight down the jet bridge while the attendant behind him said something about the boarding process that he didn't hear. He sat in the window seat and put his phone on his knee and stared at it. She had put his name down. Somewhere in the process of building her new life in Atlanta, prenatal forms, hospital intake paperwork, the administrative machinery of having a baby, she had written his name in the box that said emergency contact, and she had put his phone number beside it, and she had not told him. He didn't know what to do with that. He sat with it the way you sit with something that's too large to hold properly, just keeping it close, letting it press against you. The flight was 1 hour and 41 minutes. He spent most of it with his elbow on the armrest and his hand over his mouth, staring at the seat back in front of him, running calculations he couldn't complete because he didn't have enough information. Placenta separation. 32 weeks. Early labor. He knew enough to know that 32 weeks was not catastrophic. Babies born at 32 weeks survived, thrived, grew up and lived whole lives. But he also knew enough to know that it was not nothing, that it was a territory of risk. And Olivia was in it alone. He landed at 5:43. He was in a cab before the jet bridge door had finished opening, badge and status doing the work, and he told the driver Grady Memorial, and the driver nodded and merged into the airport traffic. And Damien sat in the back watching Atlanta come at him through the window and called Dr. Webb's number. She answered after 2 rings. "She's still in labor," Dr. Webb said. "We've been administering medication to slow the contractions. It's working, partially. But the separation is stable. It hasn't worsened. That's good. How is she?" A slight pause. "She's frightened. She's managing it the way she manages most things, which is by asking very precise questions and processing the answers carefully. But she's frightened. Her mother is here, has been since about an hour after Miss Carter arrived." A brief warmth entered the doctor's professional register. "Mrs. Carter is a very settled presence." "Yes," he said. "She is. Mr. Moretti, when you arrived, she knows you're coming. I told her you called. I hope that was all right." He stopped. "What did she say?" "She said," a pause, like the doctor was deciding something. "She said, okay." He hung up and looked out the window at the highway and thought, okay. In Olivia Carter's language, okay from a hospital bed at 32 weeks meant something. He didn't know exactly what, but it meant something. Grady Memorial was a large urban hospital, broad, loud, the particular organized chaos of a place that handled everything and paused for nothing. He went to the maternity ward on the 4th floor and gave his name at the desk, and a nurse led him down a hallway that smelled of antiseptic and floor wax, and the peculiar tension of places where consequential things were constantly happening behind closed doors. The nurse stopped at room 412. She knocked twice and opened the door. The room was small and utilitarian. One bed, monitoring equipment, a chair that Margaret Carter was occupying with her coat still on, and her hands folded in her lap in that way she had, the posture of a woman who had decided this situation would not exceed her capacity to manage it. She looked at Damien when he came in without surprise and without particular warmth, but without hostility either. The look of a woman who had decided to defer her judgment until more information was available. Olivia was in the bed. She had a fetal monitor strapped around her abdomen and an IV in her left arm, and the hospital gown that reduced everyone to the same vulnerable register, regardless of anything else about them. Her hair was loose and her face was pale, and she was looking at the ceiling when he came in, and then she looked at him. He crossed the room and stood at the side of the bed. "Hi," she said. Her voice was rough, not from crying, he thought, but from the particular exhaustion of managed fear sustained over several hours. "Hi." He looked at the monitors. The heartbeat line moved in its steady rhythm. "How are you feeling?" "Like someone is trying to evict my daughter 6 weeks early." A short breath through the nose, not quite a laugh. "The doctor says if they can keep the contractions slow for another 12 hours, the separation might stabilize enough to not need emergency delivery." She looked at the monitor. "We're at hour 3. He pulled the second chair, a plastic thing from the corner, to the side of the bed and sat in it. Margaret watched this without comment. "You didn't have to come," Olivia said. "Yes, I did." She looked at him, not arguing, just taking it in. "You put my name down," he said, quietly. She looked away, at the monitors. "I did it weeks ago, after the grocery store. I don't entirely know why." "I do," he said. She didn't ask him to explain. He didn't, Margaret said from her chair. I'm going to get coffee. She stood. She looked at Damien for a moment, a long, assessing look that contained an entire chapter's worth of things she was choosing not to say. And then she walked out and closed the door. The room was very quiet except for the monitor. Olivia shifted slightly in the bed, adjusting her position with the careful movement of someone working around discomfort. And he almost reached for her arm and stopped himself. And then she said, without looking at him, "You can," and stopped. Tried again. It helps to have something to hold on to during the contractions. He reached out and put his hand over hers on the bed rail. She didn't look at him, but her hand turned over and her fingers closed around his, and she held on with a grip that was tighter than he expected and said nothing, and he said nothing, and the monitor kept its rhythm. They sat like that for a while. "Did you talk to your father?" she said eventually. "Yes." "And?" "The file is gone. He shut it down before I left the building." She absorbed that. "How?" "I gave him leverage in a different direction." He paused. "It cost some things, but nothing that matters more than this." She looked at him then. "What did you give up?" "Nothing that was mine to keep." She studied his face for a long moment, that honest, direct look. And then another contraction came, and he felt it in her grip before he saw it in her face. Her hand tightening around his fingers, her breath going short and controlled, her jaw set. He sat still and let her hold on and kept his eyes on her face and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would be more useful than simply not moving. It passed after 40 seconds. She released a long breath. 12 years ago, she said, when she could talk again, my mother went through something like this. Not exactly the same, but she had a scare with a pregnancy that didn't work out. And she told me once that the thing she remembered most wasn't the physical part. She stopped. It was being alone in a room and understanding that the fear didn't care about anything she'd decided. It just came. He listened. I've been very decided, she said, about all of this, about what I want and what I don't want, and what you are and aren't allowed to be. She looked at the ceiling, and then you're lying in a hospital room and the fear comes and you're not decided about anything anymore. You're just... She stopped. Present. Yes, he said. I'm not saying anything has changed. I know. I'm not saying you get to... Olivia. His voice was very quiet. I know. I'm not asking for anything. I'm here. That's all. She closed her eyes. 12 hours. They had 12 hours to find out if the body would cooperate with what everyone needed it to do. Set. He did not leave the room. Margaret came back with coffee, and the three of them maintained a careful, pragmatic truce. Margaret in her chair, Damien in his, Olivia in the bed, the monitor marking time with its steady line. Dr. Webb came in every 90 minutes and checked the readouts and adjusted the medication and spoke to Olivia in the measured, informative way of a doctor who respected her patient's need to understand exactly what was happening. At hour 7, the contractions had slowed significantly. At hour 9, Dr. Webb said the word they'd been waiting for. Stable. The separation had not worsened. The baby's heart rate was strong and consistent. The early labor was responding to the medication. If the next 3 hours held, they would take Olivia off the emergency protocol and move to monitoring. Damien felt something that had been locked in his chest for 9 hours release so suddenly it almost hurt. Olivia said, "Okay," in her precise, controlled way. And then, when Dr. Webb had gone, she turned her head to the side and he saw the exact moment the control slipped. Not collapsed, just slipped, just the one moment. And she pressed the back of her free hand against her mouth and breathed out very slowly, and her eyes were bright, but nothing fell. Margaret stood up and came to the other side of the bed and put her hand on her daughter's hair and said nothing, which was the right thing. Damien kept his hand where it was. At hour 11, Olivia slept. Her grip on his hand loosened as she went under. Gradually, then fully, and he sat in the chair and watched the monitor and let her sleep. Margaret watched him from the other chair. She had been watching him in the particular peripheral way of someone conducting a long assessment for the past 11 hours. He was aware of it. He didn't address it. He understood that Margaret Carter would reach her verdict in her own time, and that nothing he said would accelerate it. At some point past midnight, she said, quietly enough not to wake Olivia, she named the baby. He looked at her. She hasn't told you, Margaret said. It wasn't a question. No, Margaret was quiet for a moment. She told me 2 weeks ago. She was very certain about it. She paused. Clara. He looked at the monitor. The name arrived in him quietly and then less quietly. The weight of it, the specific choice of it. The woman who had knocked on his office door and told him the truth about the night Olivia had come to the penthouse and turned around. She knows? He said. Olivia called her, Margaret said, in December, to say thank you. A pause. Clara apparently cried for 10 minutes. He sat with that. You hurt my daughter very badly, Margaret said. Not accusatory, just plainly the way you state geography. I know. She is not a woman who forgives things easily or completely. She looked at her daughter's sleeping face. She gets that from me. I know that too. Margaret was quiet for a moment. She's going to need help. The real kind. Not money. Not arrangements. Presence. She looked at him. The 10 o'clock kind. He met her eyes. I understand. Margaret nodded once. Then she settled back in her chair and looked at the monitor and said nothing else. At hour 12, Dr. Webb came back in. She checked the readings. She checked them again. She made a note on her tablet and looked at Olivia, who had woken up in the last 20 minutes and was watching the doctor's face with the focused attention of someone reading a verdict. The labor has stopped, Dr. Webb said. The separation is stable. We're going to keep you overnight for observation, and there will be strict rest requirements for the final weeks, but we are not delivering tonight. Olivia closed her eyes. When she opened them, she looked at Damien. He was already looking at her. She said, She's okay. She's okay, he said. She nodded. Something moved across her face, relief and exhaustion, and something else. Something that had been held at careful arm's length for months and was, in this room, with her hand still loosely around his, a little closer than it had been. Then the door opened. Not Dr. Webb, not a nurse. Ethan. He came in quickly and quietly, and the look on his face was the one Damien had been trained since childhood to register. Not panic. Ethan never panicked, but the compressed, careful expression of someone holding something in that needed to come out. He looked at Olivia. I'm glad you're all right. He meant it. Then he looked at Damien. Damien stood. Outside, Ethan said. In the hallway, under the fluorescent lights, with the ward noise moving around them, Ethan spoke quietly and quickly. Your father called Marco Caruso tonight, he said. 2 hours ago. I just found out. Damien went still. He withdrew the alliance offer, entirely, told Caruso the family was restructuring internally and was not in a position to formalize new arrangements. Ethan paused. And then he called 3 of our longest-standing partners, Belmont Logistics, the Farrar Group, and the Whitfield Property Trust. And he told all 3 of them the same thing, that the organization is in transition, that decisions going forward will require dual authorization. He held Damien's eyes. Dual, meaning him and you, meaning nothing moves without your sign-off. Mir ist so schreienbein. Damien said nothing. That's not a concession, Ethan said carefully. That's a restructuring. He's formalizing you as co-authority, which means he's also formalizing you as co-responsible. Everything the family does from this point, every operation, every arrangement, every decision, is on your name too. Officially. He paused. He's not stepping back. He's pulling you in deeper. Damien looked at the wall. He's doing it because of tonight, Ethan said, because he knows you're in that room. He's saying, you want to choose her? Fine. But you choose her inside this family, inside this name, with your hands in everything this family does. He stopped. He's not letting you walk away clean, Damien. He's making sure that whatever life you build in Atlanta, it is built inside the Moretti organization, permanently, completely. And Olivia and your daughter live inside it too, whether she knows it or not. The hallway hummed. Damien stood very still and felt the shape of his father's move settle fully into him. The elegance of it, the cruelty of it, the way it used his own choice as the mechanism of the trap. He had walked into that hospital room to protect Olivia from the Moretti name, and his father had just legally embedded that name into every decision Damien would make for the rest of. He stood in that hallway for a long time after Ethan finished. The fluorescent lights above him did what hospital lights always do. Flattened everything, removed shadow, made the world look like a place where things could be examined without mercy. Ethan waited. He had the patience of a man who had spent 30 years knowing when his cousin needed silence more than counsel. Damien thought about his father, not with anger. The anger had burned through its fuel somewhere over the Atlantic on the flight back from a different crisis months ago, and what remained was something colder and more permanent than anger. He thought about Vincent Moretti at 68, sitting in that corner office on Park Avenue, making phone calls in the dark hours of a January night to restructure an entire criminal organization's authorization chain because his son had chosen to sit in a hospital room in Atlanta instead of coming home. He thought about the specific architecture of his father's mind, the way it treated love as a liability to be managed, the way it turned every human choice into a strategic variable, the way it had looked at Damien's presence in that hospital room and seen not a man sitting beside the mother of his child, but a weakness that needed to be converted into a leash. He thought about the yellow shoes. He thought about Clara and the name Olivia had given a baby who wasn't born yet, and the 10 o'clock kicks, and a woman lying in a hospital bed who had written his name in the emergency contact box weeks ago without telling him, and had held his hand for 11 hours without asking for anything, except that he not move. He thought about what it would mean to spend the rest of his life co-authorizing decisions for an organization that operated in the space between legal and criminal, with his name on every document, his signature on every arrangement. Olivia and Clara living inside a structure that his father had built and that his father had just formally locked him deeper into. And he thought, no, not negotiated no, not strategic no, not the no that comes with a counteroffer or a modified arrangement. Just no. The flat, final kind. The kind that comes from somewhere below calculation, from whatever part of a person is left when everything that's been constructed around them gets stripped away. He looked at Ethan. Call Whitfield, he said. Tonight. Tell them the dual authorization arrangement is not in effect. Tell them any communication from the Moretti organization goes through me directly, or it doesn't go at all. Ethan blinked. That directly contradicts your father's, I know. Damien, he'll treat that as what? I know what he'll treat it as. His voice was very quiet. Make the call. Ethan looked at him for a long moment. The look of a man who had been loyal his entire adult life and was now being asked to decide what that loyalty was actually made of. Then he took out his phone. Belmont and Ferrara too, he said. All three, tonight. Ethan nodded and stepped away down the corridor. Damien went back into the room. Olivia was awake when he came back in. Margaret had fallen asleep in her chair with her coat still on, the deep, economical sleep of a woman who had learned to rest efficiently because rest was a resource and you didn't waste resources. The monitor kept its rhythm. The room was quiet. Olivia watched him cross to the chair beside her bed and sit. She looked at his face. What happened? She said. Not a question, the way she'd said it before. This was a different register, quieter and more careful. The voice of someone who could read the specific quality of stillness on a person and was bracing for what it meant. He told her. He told her about Ethan's call, about the dual authorization, about what his father had done with his presence in this hospital room. He told it plainly and completely without softening the operational details, because she had earned the full picture 3 conversations ago, and he was done deciding what she could handle. She listened. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, looking at the monitor. He's very good, she said. Yes. He looked at you choosing me and turned it into a mechanism to bind you tighter. Yes. She was quiet again. Then, what did you do? I called it off. All 3 contacts. Tonight. She looked at him. What does that mean for the organization? It means my father and I have an open conflict tomorrow morning instead of a slow one. He held her eyes. I've been managing the slow version for months. I'm done managing it. Olivia looked at the ceiling. He could see her processing it, the full weight of what tomorrow looked like, what the version of his life he was describing would actually cost. You could lose everything, she said. Your position, the organization, the relationships your family has built for... Yes. That's not nothing, Damien. I know that. I need you to actually know it. Her voice had an edge in it, not anger, something more precise than anger. The voice of a woman who needed the man beside her to have counted the cost clearly before he paid it, because she was not willing to be the reason someone destroyed their life on an impulse and resented it slowly over years. I need you to know it the way you'll know it in 10 years, in 20. When it's not a hospital room and you're not running on adrenaline and it's just a Tuesday and you have less than you might have had. He looked at her steadily. I know it that way. Do you? I have been thinking about my father since I was 8 years old, he said, about what he built and what it cost him, about the version of a man you become when you treat every person in your life as a variable. He's brilliant, and he is powerful, and he has nothing. Not one person in that organization who is there because they want to be rather than because they have to be. Not one relationship that would survive the removal of the leverage. He paused. I have watched that my entire life, and called it strength because I didn't know what else to call it. I know what to call it now. She looked at him. I'm not walking away from everything, he said. I'm walking away from what he built. What I've built is different. Different partners, different operations, things I can put my name on in daylight. It's enough to live on. It's enough to build something real. He stopped. I'm not asking you to trust the Moretti name. I'm asking you to trust what I'm building instead. A very long silence. The monitor. Margaret's quiet breathing from her chair. Outside, down the hallway, someone laughed. A nurse, short and genuine. The sound of a person having a normal moment in an abnormal place. You're going to call your father tomorrow, Olivia said. Yes. And say what? That I'm separating from the organization's central structure. That my operations are mine. That he doesn't have co-authorization on anything with my name on it, and I don't carry co-authorization on anything with his. He kept his voice level. I'll offer him a clean separation. No conflict, no exposure, no leverage used against either side. Just parallel, separate. And if he doesn't accept that? Damien was quiet for a moment. Then it gets harder before it gets easier. She absorbed that. Clara kicks at 10, she said quietly. He looked at her. I need you to understand what you're signing up for, she said. Not the Moretti heir, not the man who sweeps in and fixes things and then goes back to New York. The man who is there at 10 o'clock when she kicks and she can't sleep, and at 2 in the morning when she's sick, and at every appointment, and at every ordinary, unremarkable Tuesday that doesn't feel like a movie. She held his eyes. That man, that's what she needs. That's what I want to be. Wanting isn't enough. I know. He didn't look away. Give me the chance to show you the difference. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, Move the chair closer. He did. She closed her eyes. He sat beside her and listened to the monitor mark the hours. Osher. He called his father at 8 the next morning from the hospital parking lot. The January air was sharp and the sky was that particular pale gray that precedes real winter light, and he stood beside the rental car with his coat buttoned and his breath making small clouds and waited for Vincent to answer. Vincent picked up on the third ring. No greeting. I know why you're calling, his father said. Then I'll be brief. Damien kept his voice even. I'm separating my operations from the family structure. Clean line. Nothing shared, nothing crossed. You keep what you built. I keep what I've built. No conflict. A silence. You're doing this from Atlanta, Vincent said. From a hospital parking lot, I assume. Yes. While she's still in there. She was discharged an hour ago. She's fine. The baby is fine. Another silence. Then, unexpectedly, his father said, Good. Just the word. Flat, but something underneath it that Damien filed away. The dual authorization was a move, Damien said. I understand it. It was a good one. But it's done. The contacts know. There won't be confusion going forward. You think I'll accept this? I think you're practical enough to accept a clean separation over an open conflict that costs us both and benefits nobody. A long pause. The Caruso Alliance is your business, not mine. Do what you want with it. And the girl. Damien felt his jaw tighten. Her name is Olivia. And Olivia. His father said the name with something that was almost effort, not warmth, but an attempt at precision, the adjustment of a man being asked to reclassify something. She stays in Atlanta. For now, yes. And my granddaughter. The word landed differently than Damien expected. He heard something in it, not sentimentality. Vincent Moretti was not built for sentimentality, but something that lived in the same region. An acknowledgement. The reluctant registration of a fact that had emotional weight, regardless of how inconvenient that weight was. Her name is Clara, Damien said. Silence. She's not born yet, Damien continued, but when she is, that's her name. He heard his father breathe. Once, slow. I won't have interference in their lives, Damien said. From you or from anyone in the organization. That's the line. Everything else, the operations, the structure, the business, we can negotiate the details. But that line doesn't move. A very long pause. The Whitfield group will want a formal letter, Vincent said finally, clarifying the structure, which meant yes, not gracious, not warm, just practical and final, the way his father accepted everything, by treating it as an operational matter once the emotional battle was lost. I'll have something drafted this week, Damien said. See that you do. He almost hung up. Then he said, Father. What? A pause. He hadn't planned to say anything else. But standing in the parking lot with his breath clouding and the pale sky overhead, and Clara somewhere in a hospital building behind him, with a heartbeat that had been strong and consistent all night, he said, You could meet her when she's born, if you wanted to. The silence this time was different from the others. We'll see, Vincent said, and hung up. Damien stood in the parking lot for a moment longer. He looked at the sky. He thought about the word will and what it contained. Not a yes, not the warmth that a grandfather was supposed to offer, but something. And he decided that something was enough to work with, and that he would not require it to be more than it was, and that some distances close slowly if you didn't force them, and not at all if you did. He went back inside. They discharged Olivia at 10:15 with strict instructions: bed rest, limited activity, weekly monitoring, no stress. The last instruction delivered by Dr. Webb with a slight look at Damien that he accepted without comment. Margaret drove her home. Damien followed in the rental car because Olivia had said he could, and because in Olivia's language could was a significant word. The house on the quiet street looked the same as it always did, small and careful. The winter trees bare. The wooden bench on the porch. Margaret pulled into the driveway, and Damien parked at the curb, and they got Olivia inside and settled on the couch with blankets and a pillow and the remote control and a glass of water and the particular efficiency of women who knew how to run a domestic crisis without ceremony. Then Margaret said she was going to the grocery store and looked at Damien and said, 1 hour, which was not about groceries. She left. The house was quiet. Damien sat in the armchair across from the couch, not beside her, giving her the space of the room, and they sat in the first real silence they'd shared since the hospital that wasn't occupied by medical machinery. Olivia had her hand on her abdomen, the absent, present gesture of a woman who had been doing it for months. She was looking at the window. The winter light came through flat and gray and made everything in the room look considered, like a photograph of something rather than the thing itself. I owe you something, she said. He waited. I've been treating the last 6 months like a math problem, she said. What you did wrong and what it cost and what the variables are now and whether the numbers add up to something I can justify. She stopped. And the numbers do add up, actually. That's the thing. You've shown up in every way I asked you to, and several I didn't, and you drew a line with your father that I know cost you, and you sat in that chair for 11 hours without asking me for anything. She paused. The numbers add up. He said nothing. But I've also been using the math as a way to not feel anything, she said. Because feeling things it's harder. It's scarier. Because I was very sure about you once, and then I heard 15 words at a dinner table, and I wasn't sure about anything anymore, including myself. And I don't know how to be sure again without also being afraid of what it costs if I'm wrong. You might be wrong, he said, quietly. I can't promise you won't be. I can promise I understand what it costs if I'm wrong, and that I won't let myself forget it. She looked at him. I'm not asking you to stop being afraid, he said. I don't want you to. The fear it's honest. It comes from something real. I want you to be afraid and come toward it anyway, and I want to be someone who makes that worth it over time." He paused. "That's all I've got. I don't have a better argument than that." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "There's a room at the end of the hall. It was supposed to be a study, but my mother doesn't study anything. It's empty." She held his eyes. "If you're going to be in Atlanta, actually in Atlanta, not flying in and out, you need somewhere to stay that isn't a hotel." She paused. "My mother has opinions about the hotel." He understood exactly what she was offering and what it wasn't. "I'll pay rent?" "Obviously. I'll stay out of the way when you need me to." "Yes, you will." He looked at her. Something in him, something that had been locked tight and structural and load-bearing for 34 years, shifted. Not broke. Shifted. The way old things shift when something new puts gentle, consistent pressure on them over time. "Okay," he said. She nodded. She looked back at the window. "She's going to know you," Olivia said. "Clara, whatever else happens, she's going to know who her father is." She said it simply, not as a concession or a gift, as a fact she had decided and was stating plainly. "I need you to understand that's not conditional on us. That's just true. I understand. And whatever we are, whatever this is or isn't, she comes first. Always." "Always," he said, without hesitation. She was quiet for a while. Then, "She's going to have your jaw." He looked at her. "The ultrasound," Olivia said. "The last one, last week. I could see it." She kept looking at the window, but something in her face had changed, softened at the edges, the way things soften when a person stops holding them rigid. "She's going to be stubborn about it, too. I can already tell." "She gets that from her mother," he said. Olivia almost smiled. It was small and controlled and over quickly, but it was there. He moved his things out of the hotel the following day. The room at the end of Margaret's hall was small and had a window that faced the backyard, 2 bare trees, and a bird feeder that Margaret maintained with the same practical consistency she brought to everything. He put his bag down and his laptop on the small desk and stood in the doorway for a moment looking at the space, which was the most ordinary room he had occupied in his adult life, and felt something he had no ready name for. Not peace exactly. Something more provisional than peace. Something that would need to be maintained. He called Ethan and spent 3 hours working through the operational separation from the central Moretti structure. The details were complicated and would take weeks to fully untangle, but the shape of it was clear, and Ethan was methodical and loyal and Damien had come to understand, been hoping for something like this for years without ever saying so. When the call ended, Ethan said, "For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing." "I know you do," Damien said. "I mean it." "I know that too." A pause. "Thank you. For everything. For the last 6 months." A silence. "She's lucky," Ethan said. "I'm the lucky one." He hung up and sat at the small desk and looked at the bird feeder in the yard and thought about what the next several weeks would look like. The legal work, the business restructuring, the prenatal appointments, the preparation for a baby who was coming in 6 weeks, whether the rest of the world had sorted itself out or not. He thought about 10 o'clock. She arrived on a Tuesday in late February, 3 weeks before her due date, which surprised no one. The labor was 9 hours, which was longer than anyone wanted but shorter than it might have been. Margaret stayed the entire time. Damien stayed the entire time. There was a moment around hour 6 when Olivia looked at him across the room with an expression that contained approximately 0 patience for the entire situation and said, "If you say anything encouraging right now, I will ask you to leave." And he said, "Okay," and said nothing else. And she looked at him for a moment and then said, "Thank you," and went back to the work of it. Clara. Margaret Moretti was born at 4:17 in the morning, 6 pounds, 1 ounce, 19 inches, a full head of dark hair which made the delivery nurse laugh with the particular delight of someone who had seen thousands of these moments and still found them astonishing. She came into the world loudly, which Damien took as a sign of something. They handed her to Olivia first. He watched Olivia's face in the moment she held her daughter for the first time and understood that he was seeing something that had no adequate language, something that operated at a level below words and probably below thought. The collision of 9 months of terror and hope and difficulty resolving in an instant into something so specific and so complete that it rearranged the entire architecture of the room. Olivia looked at her daughter and said nothing for a long time. Then she looked up and found Damien's face and said quietly, "Come here." He crossed the room. She placed Clara in his arms with the careful, practical instruction of a woman who had read approximately 4 books on newborn handling in the past month and was now translating that knowledge into action, and then she let go. He had held, in his life, many things of value. None of them had weighed 6 pounds and 1 ounce or looked like this. The small, crumpled face, the dark hair, the hands that were so preposterously small, he felt something in his chest do something he would not describe later to anyone. She moved in his arms, a small, ancient movement, the instinctive search of a new creature for warmth, and he adjusted his hold without thinking, and she settled. He stood in the delivery room at 4:20 in the morning in Atlanta, Georgia, with his daughter in his arms, and the feared Moretti heir, and the ruthless operator, and the man who had learned to function in rooms where terrible things were decided quietly and efficiently was simply gone. Not suppressed, not controlled, just gone, replaced completely by something that had apparently been waiting in him for 34 years for exactly this. Margaret, from across the room, made a sound that she would later categorically deny was anything other than a cough. Olivia watched him. He looked up and found her eyes, and something passed between them that didn't require any of the language they'd spent 6 months building and testing and breaking and rebuilding. Something that was simply true. He sat down in the chair beside her bed with Clara in his arms, and she reached over and put her hand on his arm, and they stayed like that while the room settled around them and the sky outside the window began the long, slow work of becoming morning. 3 months later, on a warm Atlanta evening in May, Damien's phone rang during dinner. He was at the kitchen table, Margaret's kitchen table, which had become, over the past 3 months, the center of a life he was still surprised to be living. Clara was in the baby monitor on the counter, her breathing the small, constant sound that had become the rhythm of the house. Olivia was across from him with her hands around a glass of water and a report open on her laptop, because she had gone back to freelance work 2 weeks ago with the focused efficiency of a woman who found inactivity agitating. He looked at the phone screen. His father. He and Vincent had spoken 4 times since January. Short calls. Operational. The careful, technical language of 2 men working out the details of a separation that was never going to be simple. There had been no warmth in the calls and no hostility either. Just the exhausted pragmatism of people who had fought and reached an arrangement and were now living inside it. He excused himself and went out to the back porch. "Father, the Whitfield letter," Vincent said. "It arrived. The structure is clear." A pause. "Belmont confirmed this morning." "Good." Another pause. Longer than the operational ones. "Ethan tells me she was born in February," Vincent said. Damien was quiet for a moment. "Clara." "Yes." "February 22nd. "Clara," his father repeated. Just the name. Something moved through the word, something Damien recognized now, after months of watching it operate at a distance in a man who had spent 60 years teaching himself to suppress it. Recognition of the name and of what it meant that she had chosen it. "She looks like you," Damien said. "The jaw." A silence. "I'll be in Atlanta next month," Vincent said. "Business. I may have some time. I'll let Olivia know." A pause. "She'll need to agree to it." "Yes," Damien said, "she will. And if she doesn't, then you come back another time." His voice was quiet and without apology. "That's how it works." A very long silence. "All right," Vincent said. He hung up. Damien stood on the back porch and looked at the yard. The 2 trees and the bird feeder, the warm evening air, the kind of ordinary that he had spent 34 years moving through without ever once stopping to look at directly. He could hear Olivia inside, the shift of her chair, the quiet sounds of a house that was inhabited and working. He went back in. She looked up when he came through the door. "Your father?" she said. "He wants to come meet her, next month." She looked at her glass for a moment. He watched her process it. The full history of that, everything it contained, everything it cost her to consider it. Then she said, she should know her grandfather. She looked up. Even if he's difficult. He is very difficult. So is she already, Olivia said. Maybe they'll understand each other. He sat back down across from her. From the monitor came a small sound. Not distress, just Clara announcing something to the empty room, the unprompted vocalizations of a 3-month-old discovering that sound existed. Olivia reached over and turned up the volume, and they both listened. It went quiet again. Damien looked at Olivia across the table, at the woman who had walked out of his penthouse with $42 shoes in her purse and rebuilt her life from scratch, and carried a daughter alone through months of fear, and had never once asked him for anything she hadn't decided he'd actually earned, and thought about the long distance between who he had been and where he was sitting, not arrived. He understood that. Not finished, not resolved, not the clean ending of a story that didn't have one. Just here, in this kitchen, at this table, with the monitor on the counter and the warm May evening coming through the window and everything that needed to be built still in front of them. Come home, Damien. That's what she had said, in the version of this story he had imagined when he was still in New York. The door opening, the fairy tale closing. What actually happened was quieter and harder and more real. What actually happened was a Tuesday night at a kitchen table with a baby monitor and a freelance report open on a laptop and the leftovers from dinner still on the stove, and Olivia saying, without looking up from her work, "Clara's going to wake up in about an hour. Can you take the first one?" "Yes," he said. She turned a page. He cleared the dinner plates. And outside, the spring evening settled over the quiet Atlanta street, where a girl named Clara was sleeping in a house that was still being built, not from stone or money or the name on the door, but from the daily, unspectacular, irreplaceable work of 2 people who had broken something between them and were choosing every ordinary day to build something better in its place. That was the story. Not a fairy tale. Something stronger.